Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this Biomakers webinar with RegenAg Nation. We're going to wait a couple minutes for more attendees to join us, and then we will get started. So to anyone that's just hopped on this webinar, we're going to wait another 30 to 60 seconds, and then we will get this webinar going. All right, looks like we have a solid number of attendees. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biomakers webinar, From Data to Dollars, a Soil Health Roadmap to Improving Grower ROI. I'm Tennille Liebner, and today I'm joined by two special guest speakers, Roger McKinley and Trey Reid. Roger is the Business Development Lead at RegenAg Nation, and Trey Reid is the agronomist. Roger and Trey, would you both like to share a bit about yourselves before we get started? And Roger, we can start with you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Tennille stated, I'm in the business development arm of RegenAg Nation. Handle all the media marketing, vendor relationships, and our strategic direction and what we're doing and how we're going about it.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the lead agronomist is the role that I serve here at RegenAg. I just want to give a shout out real quick to Neil, to your marketing team. I love the name of this presentation, Data to Dollars. And I love it because it's relevant to the conversation today, but also it's kind of a great philosophy to embrace in the field. It seems like the best outcomes come from the best data, and you make great decisions when you have great data. And so big shout out to the whole Biomakers team. You guys are a big part of doing this and taking a look at the soil through a different lens. So thank you so much for all that.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. Okay, so thanks for sharing. For many of you, this might be your first Biomakers webinar that you're attending. So at Biomakers, we're a leading ag tech company founded in California, which is where I'm currently based. Our founders developed a technology that would help farmers and other agribusinesses utilize soil biology insights to make more informed decisions on the farm. So we started analyzing soil in grapes for vineyards, and now we've analyzed the soils of more than 200 crops from 56 different countries. We're working with farmers and their advisors to provide these soil biology insights. We're also working with agricultural retailers to help them provide the most precise recommendations when it comes to product placement. Another major part of our work is partnering with ag input manufacturers who use our soil biology data to analyze the impact their ag input products have on the soil microbiome and other ecosystem services. Ultimately, our insights help the agricultural industry predict, measure, validate, and communicate farmland potential and regenerate soil health and functionality. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. So a bit more about our technology, BeCrop. BeCrop combines soil microbiome DNA, environmental data, and machine learning to analyze the functions of microorganisms in the soil. We're excited to share more about some developments around the BeCrop platform soon, and how we're now providing precise product recommendations and management guidance using BeCrop, which we'll talk about a little further on in this webinar. Thanks. So the BeCrop test is one of our solutions that Roger and Trey will discuss more in a bit. It's a biological soil analysis that addresses nutrient cycling deficiencies, it identifies disease risk, and so much more. So now I'll turn over to Roger and Trey, who will talk a bit more about how they are using BeCrop as a tool to provide the most accurate recommendations to their clients.
So really, for those of you who have not met us yet, it's a pleasure being on here today. We are a privately owned company here in the Pacific Northwest. We are an input supplier, so we are supplying fertilizers, dries, and liquids to farms, commercial farms. We do a full-blown consulting package, everything from in-field scouting to agronomic plans. We utilize biomakers as part of that plan. We're also working with a lot of resources in this space as well. So NRCS, Nature Conservancy, Salmon Safe, all these organizations for farmers that are trying to make a step towards regenerative practices and finding funding for farmers in that area. We also, as an independent company, utilize a lot of this data and technologies out there. So everything from water monitoring to metagenomic testing to sap sampling, that is becoming a new forefront in testing of knowing where your nutrient levels are at in field. And finally, really reducing this environmental impact of agrochemicals in commercial farming. Now, this is where we currently are at. We're in 4 states right now that we work in weekly. So Trey and I are currently in these states with our other agronomists. Everything from seed crop production all the way to your specialty crops, whether that's hops, potatoes, onions, row crops. So those are some of the areas and crops we're currently working in. We are pushing into other areas in the United States, so expect to see us moving across the US shortly. Now, how are we using this to really leverage you as a farmer and your ROI? We need a baseline. That is one thing that we have lacked in regenerative agriculture, is knowing where we're starting at and what we're working towards. So A is having a baseline and then tracking that and managing the risk. So that is a big thing in farming. So site selection on where you're planting, what you're planting in, the variety that you're going to be planting, and then managing those diseases around that that'll trip you up in your growing season. So this also leads to our plan of action. What biological inputs are we utilizing in our agronomic plans and why? And the dollars associated with that. So if we don't know, then we're just shotgun shooting in the dark from a standpoint of what farmers have done traditionally versus what we are doing today. And finally, that brings us into the product evaluation. So again, being a third party, we can look at this stuff that is in the industry from a biological inoculant, what's being used on the farm, and what's the true efficacy from the standpoint of what's being sold in the industry. So that allows us to change our agronomic plan based on the products we're utilizing. So really, where does that leave us with the tools and toolbox? I mean, being a third party company, we can find these tools and utilize them on farms. And really that comes back to the data piece. How's the data being controlled? Who owns the data? And how we leverage that data on the farm. And really that's our plan of action. Do we have all the answers right now in regenerative agriculture? No, nobody does. But this is a starting point in moving forward in what we are doing on our plants. Now, really, when I say control of data, I mean, this is the money aspect of it. I mean, conventional versus regenerative, we've heard this a lot, organic, but really what is conventional done really well? Well, it's been really easy to apply. They've controlled the data for years, and they've had absolutely amazing yields. When you look at the production levels that farms are producing now, it is unbelievable what we can produce. The cons of that, we step back to pre-COVID, inflation was absolutely absurd. I mean, just getting stuff on a farm from a supply input, not to mention fixing something. And then comes in the soil quality. What we are understanding now is that conventional is focused on 2 of the 3 major factors in farming, the physiological and the chemistry, and they've kind of bypassed the biological aspect, which we are now learning that we really need. Now, on the flip side of that, you look at regenerative and say, okay, well, not everything's perfect. I mean, we've been dubbed as snake oil for a long time. Do we know what rates of application that farmers should be using? No. And there's a massive lack of data from a standpoint of, you look at white papers that conventional ag has done for the last 30, 40 years, they have a ton of data. So, and finally, we have a lot of regenerative companies doing experimental agronomy. I feel like we need to work towards better soil prior to pulling 100 units of N out of potato program and having that fall flat on its face. So we also have companies in this space that are stepping to the extremes where there needs to be this gradual step off the staircase of saying we can make better soils and still produce the yields that we're looking for. Now, really, that starts with a baseline. Us as a company, we need a baseline before we work with you as a farmer. We need to know what quality your soil is in and where we move forward. And as a farmer, you should know that too, from a standpoint of where is your soil at, what can trip you up, and what you do need to do. So these are just all the hazards of managing issues that are in the soil. And that's an amazing part of what this Biomakers tool does for us and for you as farmers. Now, again, I'm going to say this. There's a lot of framework that's been put around regenerative agriculture, and we feel like we don't fit inside that box. There needs to be a mesh between conventional and regenerative to move that ball forward. So these are pillars that we feel like a lot of farmers can utilize, because the economics of every farm is different. I mean, even jumping across your own road where you have 2 pieces of land, your water might be different. You start talking about regionally, your microclimates are different, soil types are different, the political space is different from state to state. Water is a massive topic right now in Idaho, as everybody's seen in the news. So there's always issues from farm to farm and piece to piece, but we believe that this needs to be scalable, and that's how we built our pillars in working with farms. So I'll jump over to Trey now, and you can go from there.
Yeah, so one of those pillars is reducing agrochemicals, and I really feel like that is maybe the focal point of a lot of what we're trying to accomplish out there. There's a lot of reasons for that: resistance of these chemicals, lack of approval of new chemistry, things like that. But ultimately, what we're seeing is that synthetic chemistry, it's ensuring that we have great productive outcomes, but there's an expense to that. We've seen soil health decline, soil quality. There's also a food quality aspect to all this, and environmental impact, everything that's around us. Farming is in nature, and we need to continue to drive great soils for the long term. So the biggest issue that we see with some of the synthetics is just the persistence in soils. That persistence of, say, chemicals or synthetic fertilizers, it does have an impact to cycling of carbon and nutrients in the soil, all kinds of enzyme activity, and fungicides specifically. They can impact things like worms and beneficial fungi in the soil. So we're seeing the shift, and we're seeing a reduced biocontrol of how this system was kind of designed. Again, we talk about environmental impact, which is a huge thing on a global scale going forward. And then I think we can all agree that we want to produce healthy food that everybody can afford. So those are the challenges in front of us. The next couple of slides here, we're just going through and referencing some of these chemicals and the studies around them. As you can see, there's a ton of data. I mean, you could pull thousands of studies where they're looking at the impact of agrochemicals and their persistence in the soil. I think the biggest thing just to point out here is there is some kind of impact, positively or negatively, to almost everything you do. And so take, for instance, on this slide, 2,4-D, influencing rhizobium. It's inhibiting rhizobium in the soil, which we know is very impactful in a legume crop. Rhizobium set nitrogen from the atmosphere. So if you're trying to accomplish reducing weeds in your field, but at the same time you're inhibiting rhizobium from setting nitrogen, then we've got a negative offset there. So really finding ways to solve these same problems and going about it a different way is, I think, going to be paramount to agriculture going forward. So we are platinum dealer for biome makers here in the Pacific Northwest. These are the cash crops that we've utilized in our sample portal. We've got annuals, row crops. We've also got perennial crops and permanent crops in our database. We've got a lot of samples to draw on, and we just want to quick just touch on some of the trends that we're seeing so far. We're going to be collecting data for years. I mean, the last couple of years is just the start to this story, so we'll continue to collect this data over time, and it's going to get even more strength as we go along here. Roger mentioned baselines. You know, pretty much right now we're guessing. We're guessing at what's in our soil, how it functions, how well nutrients biologically are put into the crop. So there's a lot of stuff that we're guessing on right now, and I think that gets expensive. We all know inputs are a very, very big deal. You can't spend more than what you produce. So we got to have good baseline data. This is the first way to make ROI out of biomakers data. So measure what's in your soils. You can track what you're applying and how it influences those soils over time. And then also get a good idea of, if you change your practices and programs, how much better that soil is responding to that over time. Is this working? Am I wasting money on this aspect or that aspect? So you can do before and after applications if there's a very specific product that you're looking at using. We've just found that this is really valuable data, and you got to start somewhere. It's just like taking your first soil sample 20, 30, 40 years ago. If you continue to sample over time, then you're just going to get more productive.
I want to quickly jump in and just let the attendees know that if you have any questions for either myself or Roger and Trey, please feel free to send them in the chat, and we will get to those in the last 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, just, and also we'll share a recording with this after in about tomorrow or such. So yeah, just wanted to point that out. Please send your questions in, and we'll get to those at the end. But yeah, I really love that simplicity of, you know, everything you do has an impact, and it's so important to know that, as well as the variables that we're dealing with, in terms of, you know, monitoring and collecting this data. You know, if you don't write it down, or if you're not tracking it, how can you go back and really see what the impact was? So I wanted to ask you guys, in your experience, what tools or metrics does BeCrop provide to help farmers understand and react to changes in their soil health?
Yeah, so what we've seen is that that's a multi-year. The soil health aspect of it, soil quality, that takes time. We see big changes being made 2-3 years to kind of move the needle there. But I think, you know, you get 5-10 years down the road in making some of these changes, and that's where you see a dramatic reduction in overall costs while still maintaining good productivity. So, you know, I feel like this needs to be an annual thing. Look at this annually. There's sample protocols as far as the timing of all that. Take it at the same time. There's some really good data out there for sampling, and you guys do a great job of covering that. Just to put that back towards you, Tennille, are you finding that growers are utilizing this information year in, year out?
Yeah, absolutely, especially when it's in terms of, you know, trying to monitor sustainability and the impact of different practices like cover crops or certain inputs like compost teas and such, where the goal of these practices is to improve soil health over time. And as you mentioned, the importance of timing, right? Like it's one thing to put a calendar event annually and say, on this day every month we're going to take these tests, but at the end of the day, there's so many variables, back to your point earlier on. So, you know, ensuring that you're monitoring those variables such as temperature or rainfall or what products you applied around that time last year. And if you're doing an annual sampling, you want to ensure that you're keeping with that structure, so you're not getting too much impact from those variables, and you can get that consistent data where you're monitoring the impact of those practices on soil health.
Right. So yeah, this baseline, in my mind, this is a little bit more of a, not a long-term ROI, but You get into strategically managing your crop in different ways, but you also see the ROI over a couple of years. So some of the trends that we're seeing right now, for us, looking at biosustainability scores, that's that takeout score that you see on the front page of a BeCrop test. What we're seeing in our data, if you were to plot it out, mid-20s to mid-30s is kind of the lower end of the spectrum in terms of the overall scores. Mid-30s to mid-40s is kind of in that medium range, and then mid-40s to mid-50s is sort of in that higher range for a lot of the samples that we've done. Now, we've also had some outliers. 13's the lowest and 67's the highest. So, but it really stacks up. The data really stacks up with what the history of the fields are. So that 67 is in a perennial crop. There's very low tillage being done in that field. It's just, there's cover crops, there's more opportunities really to build that soil health. That 13 is in ground that has a history of being farmed really hard. A lot of tillage, very conventional from a product standpoint, really small rotation. So, I mean, it really does stack up with what we know the field history is for those. So I like that. How does that compare with what you guys' metrics are, Neil, as far as the ranges that we're seeing?
I mean, it's pretty on par, and like you mentioned, you've got we have those color coding to coordinate whether it's 0 to 20 for very low or 20 to 40 for low. So it definitely differentiates depending on the location and that soil type that you're dealing with, and then the crop as well. As I'm sure you're familiar with, and a lot of people who have used BeCrop, our reports are crop specific. So we take that into consideration when we're looking at the relationship between the microbes and that particular crop that we're looking at. So taking all those into consideration, yeah, it's pretty in line with what we're seeing.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're doing the best we can out here and we're not falling behind the rest of the country. So in looking at some of the other trends, we really look hard at the fungal to bacteria ratios. Our scores for all the samples we have measure from 1 to 33 all the way up to 1 to 1800. It's really one of our main objectives and goals is really to tighten the window down on that. I don't think we're ever going to see 1-to-1 like you maybe would in a forest, but at the same time, we really need to get that aspect involved and tighten that down. So that's a metric that we're looking pretty close at. In looking at the cropping and field history of all these samples that we've done so that we can make sense of this, cover cropping seems to be one of the best ways to improve fungal to bacteria ratios. Some of the things that keep coming up, oats and sorghum sudan can be helpful for that ratio. Legumes as well. So your vetches, your peas, your clover. It's just a great opportunity to improve those ratios and kind of drive that. One of the things that we're also sort of seeing as a trend is that high fungicide use might lead to more bacterial dominance, and that's just off of application history of these fields and kind of syncing that to those scores as well. We also notice that tillage seems to kind of increase and lead to bacterial dominance. So and it's really that standard regenerative pillar of reducing your tillage passes in some way, shape, or form. Either no-till, minimum till, reducing somewhere within that system. I think we can all take steps towards that. And so what you can see is we've separated out here also by row crop and perennial, just to highlight this, the tillage thing being a factor. So the average annual row crop farm for the data that we have is between 1 and 539. And then in the perennial crops, it's 1 to 100. So you can see just by having less tillage activities that you're probably going to tighten that ratio up as well. So this is kind of an interesting slide. We just want to look at what fumigation does to the soil. We wanted to specifically look at a data set out of onions from this fall. We had 14 fields, and it's reflecting in the data. So we're looking at fungal to bacteria ratios in all this. And so we had 7 different growers. The management practices, all these things were, pretty similar. So everybody has a little bit different program and does things a little bit different way, but there wasn't a ton of variation, which is also why we felt like this was a decent data set to highlight. So for the non-fumigated versus fumigated, there was a pretty substantial difference, as you can see in the fungal to bacteria ratio. Something to keep an eye on there or consider in your management potentially. And looking at fumigated versus non-fumigated. So overall diversity scores were also lower by about 80 points on average. And then looking at your total biomass of fungi in the soil, we just averaged those out, and that is a logarithmic scale. So you can see that is a massive difference from 1 million to 178,000, even though it's by 0.75. On the flip side, the bacteria was 214 million versus 100. So we are seeing just a little bit of a trend that those fields that have a history of fumigation are just coming back a little bit lower. As we know, there's a lot of reasons why we need to fumigate. If we have some massive disease problems and things like that, then we can really significantly reduce yield. So I think that's where the Biome Makers data comes in, is let's test, let's see what these soils look like so we can figure out how to manage these soils.
So could you share some examples of how you're leveraging soil biology insights through BeCrop that's led to a tangible ROI for growers?
Yeah, so I think we've got a slide coming up on that, Tennille. So I'm going to hit on that just a little bit. It was just highlighting one of the ways that we did that in season, and we're having success with that with this grower. So yeah, just hold tight on that and we'll get to it. So I think one of the biggest, so to optimize outcomes in farming, we got to mitigate risks. And that's where kind of this disease profile comes in. All these biomakers tests have a soil health and disease profile. It's specific to each crop. And so with annual crops, we really feel like this is a great way to optimize ROI. Disease profile, you should be matching this up with cultivar characteristics. So varieties, think varieties. Some of them have strengths and weaknesses. When you see this data in your report, you should be thinking which cultivars are going to be most successful within this field. That becomes even a bigger deal with perennial and permanent crops. I mean, you're talking years of ROI potentially, millions of dollars here. So again, match that to the cultivar characteristics. Another thing that you could do is try to get some tests prior to locking up a lease or a buy on some ground. I mean, is that ground even suitable to put these crops in? It's different if you're just in and out of that ground in 1 year, but if you're trying to put, say, hops or something else in, perennial crop, a permanent crop, then it becomes even more important. So just looking at this is out of a hop sample. I want to highlight this. So there was a risk of verticillium on this one. Also, Fusarium canker can be a big problem as well. And so, we just wanted to highlight that maybe if you're getting ready to go into a cycle where you're about to plant a new variety, you might want to stay away from something that's more susceptible like Cascade. Talk to breeders and see, hey, what's going to hold up. Verticillium typically doesn't cause vine collapse completely, but it definitely affects the way that nutrients and water move through the plant. Same thing with Fusarium canker. We know that Citra is particularly susceptible to Fusarium canker, and so when it gets really hot, those crops struggle to really uptake nutrients and water. You can have vine collapse with that, so just look for a different variety that's bred to get through all that a little bit better. Again, involve your plant breeders and specialists. I mean, we've got seed salesmen that understand this stuff inside out, plant breeders. So you can take this data, talk ROI, take this data to them and say, hey, what are going to be the most successful varieties to match up with this field? So again, to get back to your question, so treating according to kind of these disease panels, we had a sample come back. This was in onions, and one of the biggest problems in onions is pink root. So pink root will infect the root system and eventually cause kind of root system collapse. Again, it gets hot, we need nutrients in the plant, and they tend to really struggle to size, also have some struggles with quality as well. So this is something that was done in the fall. This grower was able to identify this. He didn't put a red onion in there that's particularly susceptible. He went with more of a yellow onion. So again, first opportunity to make a decision, impactful decision there. But then also he was able to optimize his program. So there's a particular product that's been effective, and he scheduled 2 applications of that soil fungicide product to optimize. The picture is from this year in season. If you look right in the middle of that onion root system, you can see a little twinge of pink and purple. That is pink root that's out there, but you can see it's really been managed well, and up to this point, it's not looking like it's going to cause an issue. So we don't have the end of this story right now, but it's looking like it's going to be a happy ending, and we dodged some bullets, and really we're getting ROI from this.
This also reiterates what we're seeing in the field versus what we're testing. So it's another marker in our toolbox of saying, hey, we ran this BeCrop test. We know there's a risk here. We're making a change. And as we progress through the year, we are then seeing that issue arise. So we know what we're looking for before that trips us and the farmer up in the field from having a productive and profitable year.
Yeah, so and then I guess to get the other part of what you're doing, what are we doing with the data? Well, we're kind of creating our biological agronomic plan around what we see in those reports. You guys have highlighted a lot of these reports. We know what data is in here. We've got a lot of inputs or tools, I guess, in the toolbox. I don't need to go through all of them, but you can see kind of the products that we have access to. So we didn't put this slide in, but one of the things that was really interesting is we were seeing that there wasn't a lot of mycorrhizae in the soil, and most of it was ectomycorrhizae. And so about 70% of those samples came back only endo. And so, if you've got a really mycorrhizal dependent crop, say like onions or corn, you might put in a mycorrhizae inoculant in that. These are just ways that you can optimize your program and create a better outcome for that crop in that field. And it really customized that. If you take this data in time to be able to make those decisions, you can really line all this out.
So of those, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I can go back.
No, I was just going to ask, you mentioned that you have those products in your toolbox. How are you qualifying those products that you're utilizing in the field, or how are you selecting which products to use?
So it's really about the data that we're getting back from that. Let's say we've got a really nice soil health score, and we've got a really balanced sample that comes back. One of the best tools in the toolbox is some of the simple microbial food sources that you can use to continue to drive that. We've got some products that we've used this year that we really like. The data has shown that it's really successful, and so I don't want to get into specifics on that. If you've got some questions, you can reach out to us. But if we're sitting in a good situation, then we'll just feed the biology that's there. If there's things that are missing, say phosphate solubilizing bacteria, we've got a product for that. If you're looking for a mycorrhizae in particular, because that's low in a sample, we've got a specific product for that. If we're not driving nitrogen fixing, there's options. So all that are options that we have in our toolbox. And so we're kind of customizing these plans to the data that we're getting back with biomakers, if that makes sense.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is number 4 for us, a way that we've identified that we really want to utilize, and we'll be doing this a lot more. These tests are expensive, I guess, but valuable at the same time. So as Roger said, we're independent. We want to utilize the best products that we can. One of the ways that we found to identify and evaluate products and their efficacy is the product testing that biomakers offer. So this is just an example of fish hydrolysate that we sent in 3 different samples. They varied a lot, and so this is kind of just a whole other entire conversation. We've talked about this, and maybe we can get into this at a later time in a webinar, but it's definitely a valuable way to look at products.
So to sum all this up before we turn this back over to Neil is, it's time to quit guessing. So we really challenge everybody out there, choose one field, do a test, give us a call. If you're not in the Pacific Northwest, we'd still love to work with you. I know Biomakers has groups across the United States that they're working with, but really we challenge you to get started, to start getting your data and knowing what is going on in your soil. Here's our contact information. You can jump on our social media. Trey and I talk a lot about a lot of these different topics, the testing we're doing, how we're utilizing it, the different farms we're working on. So we really look forward to working with you. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
And you guys have a podcast, don't you? Or is it more a YouTube channel?
So we've got both, but we tend to do a little more in the podcast arena in the off season. It just gets so busy in season that sometimes we're just trying to keep our head above water on that. But we definitely will be coming out with a second season on the podcast here in the fall, and then we always keep up to date with all the YouTube stuff throughout the season. So we just like to have a lot of fun and highlight different things going on in the space, and really just kind of educate. It's our way of giving back and getting people involved. So yeah, check us out and link up with us, and we can all have fun together.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate the podcast. It's always nice to have something to listen to in the car and actually learn from. So I'm going to quickly jump into something that we're really excited that we're launching here at Biomakers. It's called the BeCrop Farm, and ultimately we'll be launching this new product hopefully this month or next, and we'll be sharing more about it at a later date. But today we wanted to give you a quick preview of what's to come. So this is the intro to BeCrop Farm. By knowing the farm extension, oh, sorry, could you go back? We should have switched hands. Sorry about this. Okay, perfect. By knowing the farm extension and field boundaries, we can provide a sampling plan to assess the status of biological pathways. So that would include all the BeCrop indexes, and compute this data together with multiple different parameters on top of the standard soil microbiome analysis. So for example, weather conditions, soil physical data, temperature, etc., to generate digital maps that incorporate precise agronomic guidance on biological inputs, crop protection, and soil health needs. While soil biology is the center of our data processing, we're able to provide fertility maps when soil physical and chemical data is available. So BeCrop Farm ultimately will help solve the what and where in product placement, providing specific data-driven recommendations for product categories. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this solution provides a whole set of deliverables that will allow our clients to answer some critical questions to their operation. So for the enrolled acres of each farm, and based on the available information, they'll receive access to the digital portal, insightful analysis tools, product recommendations, high definition index maps, agronomic insights, and field level reports. So these agronomic insights are conclusions and interpretation guidance generated by our expert agronomists and ecologists, with which you can understand how to gradually apply management practices and other sustainable applications to improve the most unfavorable metrics in your results. So to the what, when, and where, this is the most novel update of BeCrop technology. BeCrop Farm is the first AI system guiding on-farm inputs. The insight-driven map seeks to answer the most critical questions of our farmers. Where do I have deficiencies and how can I solve them? So by targeting specific problem areas, we can improve crop health and yield by making informed decisions on soil management practices. Along with these maps, a recommendation will be associated with the compensation of the deficiency based on product category. So for example, humic acids or algae-based products. So both the needs map and the associated recommendations are developed under complex mechanisms of applied AI. After modeling the behavior of many commercial products across different locations and crops, predicting the environmental evolution and input effects in the area under study, and prioritizing the results based on optimizing crop performance by yield and soil health. There are estimates that will help farmers to improve farm operations and prevent certain risks that at present they're probably not observing, but that in the future they're likely to suffer from. So we'll be releasing this soon. There is a barcode on the next slide that you can scan and sign up for notifications for when this product is launched. And it's the Biomakers newsletter where we'll include updates on BeCrop Farm. So if you want to scan that, we can provide those updates to you via email. And then we'll jump into some questions. We have a couple here and we still have about 15 minutes. So if anyone else has any burning questions, please feel free to send those through the chat. But for now, this one is for you guys. Does onion and corn need ectomycorrhizal fungi? What is your experience with that? What have you guys seen?
Yeah, I think that it comes down to different plants require different microbes to really flourish. And so, you know, they really rely on water and uptake of things like phosphorus. So certain crops really require that and others not so much. There's some really good resources. If you want to email me, we could send a list of that out. But yeah, what we find is, you know, each crop kind of has a different biological profile that sort of helps it flourish more than others.
Let's go back on the slides to the page with your details, just so in case anyone missed that, they can, as we're going through these questions, reach out to you guys. So I think it was pretty far back, sorry. There we go, perfect. I'll ask this one to you guys as well from your experience of looking over, you know, multiple reports. Someone asked the question, will a 1-to-1 fungi to bacteria ratio help suppress weeds? Ultimately, that's why tillage happens.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. We see that cover crops are a great solution for that. We're also looking into technology. We've got some growers in our area that have some really great technology for weeds, laser weeders. We've seen some really good see and spray spot technology as well. that's been really beneficial. Handling weeds is one of the toughest things about getting involved in a more regenerative system. We also have read a lot of research on, the increase of salts within soils, or, imbalance of mineralogy in these soils. And so there's a ton of variables, especially based on the type of weeds that you're seeing as well. There's just a lot of variables, but we see that when people cover crop, they improve their ratios in general. And I think it also handles those weeds a lot better than leaving your soil bare. So there's just cover cropping, it puts a lot of carbon in the soil, labile carbon. It's really the best food source for your microbes. Cover cropping checks so many boxes. So if that's one step that you could take and work into your program, then definitely do it, because there's multiple advantages that can be seen. As far as the ratios specifically, I don't know that we'll get to a 1-to-1. We're still in production agriculture. There's still things that need to be done. We're talking onions and potatoes. I mean, you can't no-till a potato crop. It's just not part of the situation. So I think in general, we get discouraged because we can't be perfect, when really what we need to strive for is being better.
That is a great answer. You mentioned cover crops. I'm curious, for growers who are wanting to select cover crops, what is your method in finding one that would be a good fit per grower?
Yeah, so a lot of the data, it really centers around diversity in those cover crops. I think it really depends. You got to ask yourself, what are your goals here? What are your goals? And so if you're really looking to drive a lot of nitrogen or fertility into the soil, then you got to base your mix off of that. Get a lot of legumes involved, turn them in while they're green. It's really varies on that. We've got some really good mixes that produce consistently in the Pacific Northwest. We've got some people that help us out with that, and we're able to provide those mixes if anyone's interested in that, or share that information. Additionally, there's a lot of really good resources out there with some of the cover crop companies that supply seed. And so I really think you need to ask yourself, what am I trying to do, and what are those cover crop mixes to put in play to make that happen. Now, that being said, none of this stuff is foolproof. We don't have it all figured out, as Roger mentioned. We've seen situations where we've got a beautiful cover crop, but it gets really hard to terminate certain things within that cover crop. So we can really run ourselves into other issues that we need to solve. But that's where I think a lot of the collaboration comes into play. Growers talking to each other, sharing information, what tools and implements work best. We've got a really good handle on what mixes perform well from a general standpoint. But we all need to collaborate in the space a little bit for some of those solutions.
Yeah, I love that answer. And, like you said, that vital question of what are your goals? You've got to ask yourself that question. So here's one I'll just quickly answer this. How long until I get the BeCrop results? Our turnaround time is around 2 to 3 weeks from when the sample lands at our lab in Davis. So this is a kind of long-winded one, but let's see if we can get through it.
Can I just
go ahead.
Jump in for just a second? Sorry, Tennille, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but what we're seeing, just to back that up, and we've run a lot of samples, just to back that up, we're averaging right around that 2-week mark. So I'm not saying it's never going to be more than that. It's good to get ahead of it, but what we're seeing is about 2 weeks.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, from the customer's mouth, so maybe a little more believable.
Not fake news.
So yeah, we've got one saying, have you tracked the relationship between fertilizer application and microbial activity? Example, as fertilizer use increases, plant biology interaction may decrease, and to a point that may cause microbiology to shut down. Is there a rule for producers wanting to use some synthetic fertilizer for edge or address deficiencies, but not to the point that it shuts down biology?
Yeah, I guess we don't have a whole pile of data to back that up. We do have a few samples where we've looked at those relationships, and I really think it comes down to volume. From what I can tell, salts are a major issue. This is kind of why we've started to produce our own dry fertilizers so that we could use more biological sources and really low salt index. But I think as a general rule of thumb, the track that I would kind of run on is no big, huge, I guess, bulk applications of nutrients at any one time. If you can kind of spoon feed it, then you're going to keep the biology a lot better intact, a lot more active from what we've seen. If you have to go on, say with a liquid fertilizer, try to stay under 25 units at the time. And I think you're going to see less harm done to the biology in that situation. I mean, we can't forget that we need nitrogen in the system, especially if we're trying to break down carbon or other things. So it's not, I mean, it's not the boogeyman here. We still need nutrients to drive big yields, and I think that's what we're all after. And it's also a slow process, as Roger mentioned. Walking off of that, really need to take your time and move your way backwards. But yeah, for a long-winded answer, I would say just focus on, if there's a way, like if you're doing drip or something else, then use that technology to your advantage and just kind of spoon feed the crop if you can.
I think what we're really looking for here, Tennille, is balance. We're trying to find balance in the system. So as we've said, and we'll say it again, you can't just jump off this staircase, head first and completely cut out all of your nutrition in a program. There needs to be balance. And whether you're complexing those conventional products that you're putting on there, however they're chelated, I mean, there's plenty of stuff, research, great companies out there that have that are conventional but leaning towards a more sustainable side of those inputs. And like Trey said, from that agronomic approach, spoon feed those nutrients in your system instead of bulk loading those in.
Yeah, and something else that we do a lot is we'll put a carbon source in those fertilizers to complex them, keep them available, but also it tends to be a little easier on the system as well. So if you're not doing that, that might be something that you can really see value out of.
Awesome, thanks guys. A quick note, the new Biomakers newsletter, I think the QR code was having an issue. So if you go in the chat, we have a link there. Follow that link and you can sign up to the newsletter to keep up with the updates. Another question, can Biomakers test worm casting, or is it better to test the brew or extract? We can test solid and liquid products. So then this one can be for you guys, because you mentioned, you're using humic and fulvic acid products. Have you seen improvements of fungal levels with humic and fulvic acid additions?
That's a question I can't answer. We haven't specifically looked at that. I think it would be a great study to do. I don't know if you guys have any of those types of studies. I'm assuming you do in your database. That might be something you could highlight in a blog post, but we don't have any of that data specifically.
Awesome. Let's see this one. Can pasture enhance time in cover crops if animal rotation is higher density for short time periods of grazing? Do you guys work with pasture as well?
We do a bit. It's not a huge focus, but it's part of the system, and working, grazing into a lot of these cover crop fields is something that we see a lot. One of the rules of thumb that we try to do as far as building carbon in soils is make sure that you get something involved where you really run the root system deeper into the soil. A lot of that carbon up at the surface doesn't tend to stick around for a lot of different reasons. So getting some things mixed in there potentially that have a lower, deeper root system can be impactful from carbon building standpoint, and also just create better water infiltration and things like that. We've got a couple of customers that do a lot of pasture grazing. They're going to the high intensity grazing, and you can see, maybe we just need to make a video around this, but you can see that the regrowth is so much better than just putting them out on a big paddock, say, for example. It's a lot more successful at getting regrowth and not having to replant those stands.
A lot of the guys that are running the soil conservation districts are getting, there's presentations nationwide. You can look at this. They are showing massive tonnage increase. So when you start to talk about hundredweight in cattle, for example, this high intensity grazing, they're showing that they can grow more biomass in a year. And really, this comes back to diversity of species in the ground and during that growing season. So you start talking grasses in heat and cool climates are going to grow differently, where when you're letting those cattle, and we're not professionals at this specifically, but the conservation districts talk about this in high intensity grazing and how these regrow and the carbon they sequester and how they maintain and hold more water, and how if you're working in the dry land format, those diversity of species can hold on to more water and grow more biomass, which in turn nets you more weight on the type of livestock you're growing at the end of the day.
Some great answers, guys. Thank you. Super insightful stuff. Here's an interesting one. It says, can I potentially direct more money towards calcium to get more organic nitrogen?
Can you read that again? Just
Yeah,
trying to
sure.
understand the question.
The question was, can I potentially direct more money towards calcium to get more organic nitrogen? So you,
I would say it depends. I guess whoever's asking that, reach out. I guess I don't understand entirely, or maybe they can clarify in the chat, but calcium is a huge building block of soils and also the biological fraction of the soil. So we're huge proponents in calcium, and certain calcium, you really get into the form that you're applying, what your goals are with that. And I think looking at your tests that you're doing is going to determine a lot of those relationships.
We're supposed to come in here at 11?
awesome.
We'll be done shortly. We're on a live webinar right now. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Oh, good. It happens. Someone asked for product performance evaluations. Do you conduct them yourselves, or do you have third-party companies do them also? So I'll, if that's towards biomakers, yeah, we are a third-party lab that will test those biological inputs or biostimulants. And we can also help with field trials to prove the efficacy of those products in a live soil with roots in the ground. But we also can test those products. But what about with you guys, Trey and Roger, for when you are onboarding new products? What does that look like in terms of how are you evaluating those products that people are coming to you and saying, oh, I have this silver bullet product, or whatever it may be?
Yeah, so we've got a really specific protocol for vetting products. One of the newest parts of that is biomakers, if it has to do with any type of inoculant. Specifically, we require a lot of field and third-party testing, maybe through extension or otherwise as well. But we found that in the inoculant arena, there's some massive differences in the products, what they say on the labels, the quantities that are in the products. I mean, I really think before you use something, you need to understand if it matches up with manufacturer's specs. If it's a multi-species product, it becomes even more difficult to do that. So biomakers is one of the only ways that I know of to reliably vet products from an inoculant standpoint. And we feel like that's really important to us, because we don't want to represent just anything. With our clients, we want to represent the best products. And so we're using biomakers to do that. Maybe that's something that we can jump in and speak to more specifically in another webinar down the road.
Awesome. So we've come up on time, but if we didn't get to your questions, we will email you and ensure that we get an answer to you as soon as possible. But Trey, Roger, thank you so much for your time and joining us on this webinar. It was super insightful. You guys are really well versed in what you do, and really appreciate your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Tennille.
Thank you, Tennille. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.